Lucas Cranach the Elder. There are actually two artists by the name of Lucas Cranach. One, his father, known as Lucas Cranach the Elder, and the other is his son, Lucas Cranach the Younger. And sometimes people just put 1 and 2. Lucas Cranach the Elder's dates are 1472 to 1553. He was born in a town called Cranach in 1472. He was born to a long line of painters, and his father's name was Hans Maler. Now, Maler means painter, and it means specifically fine art painter. If you're going to paint a house, or you're going to paint furniture or something like that, you would use the verb streichen. But when you're talking about fine art painting, you use the verb malen. So he is a maler. So he would have been Lucas Maler, and he was presumably trained by his father. There's no reason to doubt that. But later on, he did change his name, his last name, to Cranach, which seems to be a variation on the name of the city in which he was born. He became the court painter to the Electors of Saxony, and he served 3 different electors. And he painted all these different subjects that a Renaissance painter would paint. He painted portraits, he painted religious subjects, and he painted classical mythology. So we're going to look at some of his work. He has a large body of work. Sometimes it's a little hard to separate it out because he seems to have had a large workshop. Not only his sons, Hans, who died, and Lucas, who continued the workshop after his death, but also there seemed to be a lot of artists working in the style of Cranach. He was a friend to Martin Luther. I found, when I was researching my Art of the Protestant Reformation course, I found a reference that said that Luther's future wife stayed with the Cranachs. She learned housewifery skills from Mrs. Cranach or Frau Cranach. Anyway, and that Cranach was one of only 4 people who attended Luther's wedding. They both lived in Wittenberg. And the illustrated versions of Luther's Bible translations, when they were printed, they are woodcuts created by Lucas Cranach, or at least by his workshop. He was instrumental in developing a Protestant iconography. And he has art that is very Catholic. He has art that is very Protestant. And once again, people copy it. And there was a lot, actually, of copying works by Lucas Cranach. So let's start off a little earlier than all that with some of his earliest known paintings. These are works that he created when he went to Vienna, and he was living in Vienna. And these are his earliest known paintings. As you can see, this is a lovely Rest on the Flight into Egypt from 1504. And you see the Virgin Mary holding the baby Jesus, who's really interacting with one of the little angels. And then you have the little angels playing as though they are little children. So it's a very happy, festive kind of painting. St. Joseph is there, sort of watching over the family. Is he kind of looking at us askance? I don't know, but there it is. He's the protector. And it's in a landscape. And at this time, of course, landscapes are developing even more. And so they sometimes talk about this idea of the Danube school, the artists who are working near the Danube River, and showing this combination of human beings within nature. In this, there's still some freedom of the brushwork. Later on, Cranach will have a somewhat simplified style. We'll see it later. Well, there is an example, actually, right there. This is a detail that I took of the Elector of Saxony, and it's from a painting where he is kneeling to the Virgin Mary. It's in Karlsruhe. In 1504, he moves to Wittenberg because he is the court painter to the Duke, or the Elector, Frederick the Wise, in Wittenberg. And as a court painter, his style changes. It becomes smoother. You're not seeing much in the way of brushwork, very linear, and a lot of emphasis on pattern. And this does make it easier for people to copy him, or for his workshop to turn things out. And I will say it's often very difficult to tell, if you're not a specialist in Cranach, is this his son, or is it Cranach the Elder? Also, there's a lot of work that seems to be, generally from the workshop. Now, I mentioned that he served the Electors, plural, of Saxony. And here they are. Frederick the Wise on the left was the first elector that he served. When Frederick died, his brother became the elector. He did not leave an heir. So his brother, who is known either as John the Constant or John the Steadfast, Johann, is shown in the center here. And then when he died, his son, John the Steadfast son, who's known as John Frederick, or Johann Frederick, the Magnanimous. And since we've already talked about religion, I'll give you a little heads up as we go ahead. Frederick the Wise was Catholic, pretty devout by all accounts. But as we said, he was not going to let the Pope dictate what he should do with his university or his university professors. And so he protected Martin Luther. If he hadn't done that, if he hadn't been that broad-minded, history would be quite different. Luther and Frederick never met. But he was very important just for saving Luther's life. His brother and his nephew, the son of his brother, Johann the Steadfast and Johann Frederick, were devout Protestants. They were followers of Luther. They supported Luther. They fought battles, particularly Johann Frederick, lost a battle with the Catholic forces and was stripped of his electorship. And there was some possibility that he was going to be executed, as a heretic. But because he was a duke, they decided not to, and simply said, you can no longer elect the Holy Roman Emperor. But the interesting thing to me that is that Johann Friedrich almost was a martyr for Lutheranism, which does, I think, show their intense faith in this new, what we call today, Protestant religion. Okay. Also, among these early works, we see a crucifixion, and he paints, more standard-looking crucifixions, but he often has something a little bit different. He has a number with Longinus in, for example, alone. And in this case, it is a very expressive crucifixion, really emotional. Because one, he puts the cross at such an unusual angle, a very oblique angle. So we're looking at Christ from the side. And then we're seeing the thieves. One, we're just seeing a little bit of his body from the back on the rear, the cross and the edge of the painting sort of block our view. Another one is where presumably the good thief is on Christ's right, is hanging, and we can see him there looking quite dead. That's really unusual. And then there is this billowing loincloth. I always figure you can tell something about our artist's style by looking how he paints the loincloths in crucifixions. Some of them are angular and have sort of jabbing forms, very complex, and others are graceful arabesques. And at this one, it's almost a torment here of, it's like the wind is billowing, and yet there's nothing else except the dark clouds behind Christ, which, of course, they said that, the sun went dark at the crucifixion. So it's like the wind is picking up. But Mary's robe, John's robe, neither one of those are moving. So it's a kind of spiritual, rather than natural billowing of the loincloth. And there, below the cross, Mary and John stand. And here, Mary is not, collapsing or swooning. She is the Stabat Mater, the standing mother, erect in faith. Cranach painted 2 holy kinship altarpieces, and then there's a print by the same subject. One is in Vienna, and it's just one panel. This one is in Frankfurt, in the Stadel, the Stadlisches Kunstinstitut, the major painting museum in Frankfurt. And it is a triptych, as you can see, of the theme of holy kinship, which we've talked about before. This shows the extended family of Christ, and as well as the holy kinship with everybody. You often see paintings and statues of just Mary, Saint Anne, her mother, and Jesus. Now, those are the central figures here. Obviously, everybody's here. But if you just have those figures, Anne, who is Jesus' grandmother, and Mary, and baby Jesus, in German they have a name for this subject. We don't have to just sort of list everybody. They call it Anna Selbdritt. Anne herself 3 times. So it's when I was in Germany, I was taking lots of pictures and notes of these things. I explained them to my father, and we started calling them the genealogy picture, and he'd go, "Oh, there's another genealogy picture." This is the genealogy of Christ, in a sense, going through his the female line, because of course it was believed that Mary was a virgin, and that Saint Joseph was not the biological father of Christ. He's a worthy foster father. By the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance, they decided, that he has certain virtues. Earlier on, he was almost in the High Middle Ages. He was a figure of fun. He was the old man who didn't know how his young wife got pregnant. But that idea develops. Now here he is shown somewhat ineffectual. He looks like he's gone to sleep, where Mary and Anne, the grandmother, are playing with the baby Jesus. And Anne is holding the child on her lap. And we know that that's the Virgin Mary, because of course she has her long hair, which is a mark of virginity. Unmarried women would leave their hair long. So sometimes they still show that with Mary to suggest that she is still a virgin. His cousins are there playing, you can see, and his grandfather and what step-grandfathers are behind him. Okay, so the story, and it's a complicated, where did it come from? It came from mentions of the three Marys, the holy women in the Bible. The Bible also talks about the brothers of Christ. St. Jerome, horrified that anybody would suggest that the Virgin Mary had other children. He believed in her perpetual virginity and denounced anybody who suggested otherwise. He says that all these brothers that are mentioned, these are really cousins. And so this whole mythology, this whole story comes into being. Now, we not only have the story of the extended family of Christ, his grandmother, Anne, who is Jesus' grandmother, the mother of Mary, was said to have been married 3 times. She had 3 daughters, and with singular lack of originality, named every one of them Mary. So what you'll see in the triptych, we're seeing here Mary's 3 husbands behind her. We're seeing St. Joseph, and we're seeing some of the cousins down below. We'll also see her other 2 daughters and their husbands. So, besides just this complicated story of the kinship of Christ, we also see some sacred impersonations, as I like to call them. We see portraits of actual people, in this case, very prominent people, being used as some of the sacred figures. So this is a portrait of Frederick the Wise as Alphaeus. Alphaeus was the husband to Mary Cleophe. Cleophas was her father, so they combine the Mary name with the father's name. And they were parents to James the Less, Simon, Judas Thaddeus, all apostles, and Joseph the Just. So a number of apostles, disciples, and saints. Then on the right panel, we see John the Steadfast, Frederick's brother, who succeeds him eventually as the Elector, the Duke. And he impersonates, as it were, he is Zebedee. And you may remember in the Bible that James and John, whom we call James the Greater, James Major, and John the Evangelist are called the sons of Zebedee. So that's where his name comes from. And he is supposed to be the husband to Mary Salome. Of course, Salome is a female name, so it's a little confusing because they do give it to the male supposed husband of St. Anne, that she's married Cleophas, Salome, and Joachim. And then you also have, we said this husbands of St. Anne, we're showing in the center panel, and you might recognize one of them, with that big hook nose that we've seen earlier, with Albrecht Dürer. This is Maximilian of Austria, who was the Holy Roman Emperor before his grandson, Charles V. See, we're talking about an earlier date than we were talking about Charles V. So he personifies Joachim. And here we see the whole family with all of the cousins of Christ. One of the reasons that they think that these are so popular is because you might call it family values. We talked about the rise of the middle class in the later Middle Ages and the 15th century and the Renaissance. And that there is this idea of a family group that is, what I said, there's a kind of consciousness of not just, okay, you have children, you form trade alliances, or the dowry is passed down, or there's, for royalty, there's treaties. Yes, of course, people are still having and definitely having arranged marriages. But there is a new idea of the family as being important. And we talked about St. Joseph being the protector of the Mary. And also, I guess, a kind of sanctity of the family life. That this is where you can have your first lessons in how to behave and how to be a good Christian as well. Now, we've already talked about Cardinal Albrecht von Brandenburg, who was, who Duer sent his 95 Theses to, and of course who had gained his office of cardinal with simonry and was getting a kind of kickback from the indulgences. He was a very powerful cardinal and elector. He was also an elector. And he was the Archbishop of Mainz. He became a cardinal. He became an elector of the Holy Roman Emperor. And he had himself portrayed many, many times, especially by Lucas Cranach, or Lucas Cranach in his studio, his workshop. This is just one of these pictures. A number of times he had himself portrayed as Saint Jerome, several times in a study. But this one has a kind of peculiar iconography to it. Now, I've talked about this idea of sacred impersonations, of a person who takes on the persona of a saint and presumably either is trying to show that he's following the ideas of the saint, or perhaps he wants to be seen with that persona. And so here, remember that Jerome was believed to have been a cardinal, even though that wasn't quite possible. And St. Jerome is also the patron saint of scholars. So here, Albrecht von Brandenburg has become a cardinal. He's showing himself as not just himself as the cardinal, but he's impersonating St. Jerome. And then he's also taking on the persona of scholar, that intellectual activity as he's writing in the book. Curiously enough, this particular portrait, or painting of the saint, or however you want to think of it, combines the two types of St. Jerome images. Remember with Duer, we saw St. Jerome as a scholar in his study. And then there are many pictures of St. Jerome as a hermit out in the wilderness with his breast bare and bleeding from where he's beaten on it with a rock. There is, as you can see, a crucifix for him to meditate on. And so here we're seeing Albrecht von Brandenburg as St. Jerome as a scholar. He's got a desk, a rustic desk, I must admit, with just raw tree trunks is holding up the board. So he is a scholar. We see him in the cardinal's robes, which we usually see him when it's St. Jerome in the study. And yet he's in a landscape with his lion and other little animals, the deer, rabbit. I'm not sure, is that a groundhog? Whatever that is. So he's out in the wilderness. So it's kind of combining both sides of St. Jerome. Now, Cranach did many mythological paintings, especially of Venus, sometimes the nymph of the spring, little naked goddesses. And these were for the court circles. They combine classical mythology with, I suppose, I don't know how erotic they are, but I always want to think of them as kind of flirty, little flirty nude figures who pose for the viewer. Cranach did, and his workshop, did a number of paintings, quite a few paintings of the Judgement of Paris that are attributed to Cranach and his circle. The ones that are the two highest quality, one is the one you're looking at right now, which is in Karlsruhe, is really a small painting, a very, really tiny little gem, and a bit more, not huge, but a bit small, but a more normal painting size, you might say. There's a beautiful one in the Metropolitan Museum of Art as well. Now, the story of, you probably know by this time, the story of the Judgement of Paris, in which the Trojan prince, Paris, is assigned by the god Zeus or Jupiter to choose which of the goddesses is the most beautiful. This was occasioned by discord, literally, the personification of discord. The gods are at a feast, and she rolls in this golden apple. Discord rolls in this golden apple to cause discord. And on the apple is written the words, "For the fairest," for the most beautiful. This causes, a great deal of arguments among the female deities, but most of them drop out, say, okay, I'm really not as beautiful as you are. And the three contestants then are Juno, or Hera, the wife of Jupiter or Zeus, the king of the gods. She's the queen of the gods. Hey, is her husband going to say, you're not the most beautiful? Probably not. And Minerva, which is also a daughter of Zeus. She came from his brow fully formed. It's kind of miraculous birth. Minerva, or Athena in the Greek, the goddess of wisdom. And, of course, the goddess Aphrodite in the Greek, or Venus in Latin, the goddess of love and, as it turns out, of beauty. So Zeus is not going to try to arbitrate this quarrel between his daughters and his wife. He's definitely smart enough not to do that. So he puts it off on a mortal. And he sends Mercury with the golden apple to Paris, who at that time in the classical story is living as a shepherd. We'll explain why he's in armor in a minute. Living as a shepherd, and tells him that he gets to choose which of the goddesses is most beautiful. They offer him bribes. Juno, goddess of wealth and power, says that he could be a wealthy man or a great leader. There's various versions. In the earlier versions, Athena, who starts out as a battle goddess, says that he will be given victory in battle. But later on, she turns into, as it seems, the goddess of wisdom. So, she promises him that he will be wise. And then Venus. If you choose me, I will give you, I'm beautiful, aren't I? There's some woman who is almost as beautiful as I am. And I will give you her, the most beautiful woman in the world, as your wife. Paris doesn't ask if she's already married. He jumps at that bribe, as it were, and he declares Venus, or Aphrodite, to be the most beautiful of the goddesses, earning himself, of course, a beautiful bride, Helen, who is already married to a Greek king. And he also earns the enmity of the other two goddesses. And the result, of course, when he spirits away Helen and takes her to Troy, his home city, is that the Greeks have a have treaties between each other that they will, if one of them is attacked, or that the others will also go to battle. So all of the Greeks come to Troy. They besiege it for 11 years. Eventually, of course, they conquer and destroy Troy because the wife of one of them was abducted, or maybe she went willingly, as most of the stories have her doing this. Okay, so this is the moment before the judgment. This is when Mercury has arrived and is essentially telling Paris that Jupiter wants him to do this. But there's some things that are a little different. We're used to looking at paintings of the Judgement of Paris where the goddesses are in the nude. This comes out of classical antiquity. There's a really very funny version of the Judgement of Paris by Lucian, in which Paris is sort of like, I don't know if I want to do this, and then Mercury says, oh, but you get to see them naked. Oh, I'll do it. So that's within the classical parameters. But the classical story has nothing about Paris at this point in the story of being a warrior. And you can see he's like a knight. He's wearing plate armor. This goes back to another version. And during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, this probably medieval or version of the story, supposedly by someone calling himself Darius the Phrygian, and says that he's an eyewitness to the Trojan War. And he tells the story. And during the Middle Ages, they thought that this was actually an eyewitness, not just a fictional tale, and that the variations he had were more historical. And it was picked up by other artists, who tell in French and in Latin and Italians, and all sorts of people telling the story of Paris. And how that varies is Paris has not been exposed as an infant. He knows he's a prince of Troy. He's a warrior, and he goes out hunting. And he falls asleep near, and in art it's a stream. You see here this little pool of water, or often it's a fountain. And he has a dream in which he chooses which of the goddesses which one is the most beautiful. So that kind of explains why he's wearing armor and is near the stream, and his horse is in the background. He's not shown as the shepherd Paris, which he is sometimes in Renaissance art, but here he is shown, as the prince. And Mercury is very interesting too, because he's wearing this kind of fantastical armor, and has a long beard, not what we usually think of as Mercury as this nude figure with little, wings at his feet and on his helmet. This probably has a couple of sources. There is a few examples of Mercury bearded. It's been suggested that this is related to northern concepts of, so the Viking gods or something like that, and so some other stories. But I want you to notice one thing. He is not holding an apple. What he's holding is a transparent sphere, a crystalline orb. And this is what in pictures of God the Father, or actually a picture, sometimes God the Father, but also pictures of Christ as the Savior of the world, Christ will hold a crystalline orb, in that case surmounted by a cross. It's the orb of the universe. This story had allegorical interpretations. One very, very, early 4th century interpretation by Sallustius, he says that the prize is the universe, that the apple is a sphere. It represents the universe. So, how did that iconography get here? Did he have an iconographic advisor? Or was it because of the story? The idea is that they're getting something that's not just an apple. It's something that represents the world. And each of the goddesses have characteristics. It's an allegory of life choice. What are you going to choose? And I always feel like this is very appropriate for college students, actually, because you're at the point in your life where you're making decisions about what you're going to do with the rest of your life, what is going to be your profession, what is going to be, what choices you make. And, are you going to be, let's say, a business major and make lots of money, or go into politics and become powerful? Well, then you're a follower of Juno. Or are you going to follow the idea of scholarship and learning and be a follower of Minerva, the goddess of wisdom? Or are you most interested in pleasure? Being interested in, beautiful women or handsome men, if you're a woman, or so inclined. But at any rate, you're going to follow the life of pleasure, which is represented by Venus. Well, of course, during the Middle Ages and Renaissance, the emphasis usually was, you should choose wisdom, you should choose Athena, and this was very stupid of Paris, and of course the result was the destruction of Troy. Marcello Ficino, and I doubt that Cranach knew anything about this, but Marcello Ficino wrote about the three Venuses, but he also had the idea that you should choose, that a prince should not choose one, but should choose all. He should be wealthy, powerful, magnanimous, like Juno. He should be wise and learned, like Minerva. And he should also have some pleasure in life as well, so he should also have love, as it were. So sometimes rulers would see themselves as embodying all of the characteristics of the goddesses. I don't know if that's how Frederick the Wise saw it. Maybe it was just a cautionary tale. But it was certainly very popular. And I'm sure that one of the reasons it was so popular were these lovely, your book calls them liftsome, supple little goddesses. I think it's quite clear that Lucas Cranach was not studying anatomy. But they are lovely. They all seem to be flirting with the viewer. You might see that. And they're wearing usually a little headdress or a hat or something like that. And then the chains, the jewels, and these little absolutely transparent little veils that don't really cover anything. And they're within the beautiful landscape. And you might notice that Cupid is up there in the corner shooting an arrow. Not really at Paris, though. Who is he shooting it at? Juno? At any rate, suggesting that this has something to do with love. These were very popular, both the Judgement of Paris and just individual pictures showing Venus or Venus and Cupid. It gave you a reason to show a beautiful, curvy, flirtatious young woman. And you say, oh yes, but I'm studying classical mythology. Besides that, besides religious paintings, besides mythological paintings, or I should say besides traditional religious paintings, besides portraiture, Lucas Cranach also was, I would say, the chief artist of the Protestant Reformation, certainly the Lutheran version of it. And in a sense, many of the Protestants, as we said, were iconoclastic. You're not going to expect art from them. But Lucas Cranach the Elder was the foremost artist of the Reformation. He created the portraits of Luther and Melanchthon, which other people copied. If you have a picture in your head of either of those men, it's probably based on a picture by Lucas Cranach. And, just about anywhere you go in Germany, you often see these portraits either based on Cranach or by Cranach. He also created the designs for the woodcut illustrations for Luther's translations of the Bible. And he created altarpieces that essentially define a kind of Protestant iconography. As we said, he is a friend to Martin Luther. They were godfathers to each other's children, and Cranach created numerous portraits of Luther and his wife. This particular one is probably the most lifelike one. It was undoubtedly drawn from life and became the basis of some of the other portraits of Luther, which they do seem to be flatter and more pattern-light and very, very linear, so it could be turned out en masse, really. There was no copyright at the time, so people could take the print of Luther by Cranach and copy it themselves. And so that happened quite frequently, I think. This is one of the portraits when Luther is obviously younger of Luther and his wife, Katharina von Bora. As I said, Cranach seemed to be very involved with the marriage. It was in his household that Katharina stayed before Luther married her. You may know the story that sort of a bunch of nuns arrive in a wagon and tell Luther that they no longer are going to be nuns. They want to be followers of Luther, and he has to find them he has to find them husbands. Because, of course, you can't just have unmarried women just wandering around. That would be, they would see that as very dangerous and lewd and what have you, ruin their reputation. So he finds husbands for all of these former nuns, except for one. There's one left, and that's Katharina von Bora. And he says, well, I couldn't find anybody else, so I had to marry her. As it turns out, it seems to have been a rather happy marriage. He seems to have a great deal of respect for his wife. He talks about how strange it is to wake up and find pigtails on the pillow. But she's evidently a fabulous manager and housekeeper and all these things because he has lots of people visiting him. And there seems to be a great deal of mutual respect between them.